I call this Planning and Zoning Commission meeting to order this April 20th, 2017. Could we please have roll call?
Commissioner Norberg.
Here.
Commissioner Colton.
Here.
Vice Chair Keating.
Here.
Chair Chapman.
Here.
Chair Rosenbaum.
Here.
Commissioner Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Bash.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. If you'd please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Director Fitzner, do we have any current events or reports?
None at this time, Chair.
Thank you. This is a call to the public in order to, for those people that want to address the commission. As I just mentioned before, if you'd please fill out a call to the public form and turn that into our secretary, would appreciate it. And during this time, anyone that would like to address the commission on any matter that is not on the agenda, this would be the time to do so. Do we have anyone? Well, I've got glare here, so I don't see anyone. Okay, we'll move on to our first agenda item, and that is the consideration and action approving the April 6, 2017 Planning and Zoning Commission minutes. Do we have any discussion? Seeing none, then I would entertain a motion.
I move to approve the April 6th, 2017 Planning Commission minutes. Planning and Zoning Commission minutes.
I second.
It's been moved and seconded. Could you please vote?
Motion passes 7 votes in favor.
Thank you. Item number 2 is a consideration and action on a site plan for the Behavioral Health Hospital generally located north of Westgate Drive and west of Dysart Road. We have our planner, Sergio Angula.
Good evening, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. So tonight I'll be presenting the site plan for the Destiny Springs Behavioral Health Hospital. The site is generally located north of Bell Road, east of Grand Avenue, and west of Dysart Road. Just a close-up of the site. There's just south of the Surprise Commerce Center. The site is currently a vacant piece of land of roughly 6 acres. Here's the zoning for the property and the surrounding properties. So the zoning for this property is regional commercial, which allows a hospital use, such as the one that's being presented tonight. Surrounded to the west and to the east and the south, you have more of the same regional commercial zoning. And to the north, we have a PAD that allows for employment uses. Here's the proposed site plan. The proposed building itself is 67,000 square feet. It's proposed to be 2-story to hold 90 beds and potentially start off by employing roughly 126 employees. And just speaking with the applicant, he believes that that number could even increase once they're at full capacity. So to get into the site plan, the site proposes 4 different access points. One from Dysart Road, which would be the main entrance. The Foxfire access to the north would serve the future ambulance drop-off. And to the east is where you get your trash pickup trucks and other type of facility trucks loading, such as to that access point. On the south side is an additional access point off of Westgate Drive. And the parking is proposed fairly close to the south and to the eastern access points. And just to give you an idea here, so we are depicting the patient drop-off zone and the main entrance on the west side of the building, and the ambulance drop-off zone on the north there. So other than that, the applicant is proposing two outdoor courtyards located on the north side of the building. The building and those two, just to clarify, would be for patients. The applicant is also proposing a smaller outdoor courtyard for staff on the west side of the building, and a dining patio on the south side as well. Now, surrounding the patient's outdoor courtyard, the applicant is proposing a 14-foot high wall. The SUDC limits the height of perimeter walls to 10 feet in this zoning district, but given the type of use, the mental health facility design guidelines actually call for a 14-foot high wall. So staff feels comfortable given the use that is in the public's best interest to go ahead and go with a 14-foot high wall as their facilities design standards call for. This is a proposed landscape. As you can tell, currently there is no landscape in the perimeters along the streets. The applicant is meeting the SUDC requirements for street landscaping. And the only stipulation that was added to the landscape plan was that they simply forgot to add a tree in one of the parking landscape islands, which is required by the SUDC. There's proposed elevations. So here we have the east and the north elevations. Very similar architecture style to the Cobalt Rehab Center on the northeast corner of Dysart and Bell, with a little bit more colors and different materials, but the architecture style is very similar. And if we go to the other two sides, you can see that they are providing four-sided architecture, same level of detail on all four sides, and staff believes that this will complement the surrounding developments. Now, along with this site plan, the applicant also submitted a parcel assemblage application, which was administratively approved in March 28th. Staff recommendations is of approval, subject to stipulations A through D as listed on the staff report. And at this point in time, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Okay. Why don't we start with Commissioner Norberg?
I have no questions, just a comment that I'm really glad to see jobs coming into the city. Thank you.
Commissioner Coldham.
One comment, one question. I noticed total parking spaces are 169, and anticipated staff of 126 leaves available parking spots for visitors, additional staff, and other at 43. Does that seem to be a sufficient enough number for parking spaces?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Colton. So the number of employees given is for their entire staff, not a staff per shift. So broken down, it will be sufficient parking.
Thank you. And then the 14-foot wall, good idea, good plan. Thank you.
Commissioner Keating.
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Rosenbaum.
No questions at this time.
Commissioner Smith.
No questions.
Commissioner Bash.
Just a comment, I'm very glad to see more mental health services being provided in the West Valley area.
Okay, I have no other questions or any other questions or discussion from the commission. Seeing none, then I would entertain a motion.
I move to approve the site plan for a behavioral health hospital generally located north of Westgate Drive and west of Dysart Road.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, then please vote.
Motion passes 7 votes in favor.
Thank you. We move on to item number 2, consideration and action on a site plan for moved on that one. Item number 3, consideration and action approving the site plan for, how do you pronounce it? Is it Milliam?
Milam Glass. Milam Glass.
Milam Glass at Skyway Business Park, generally located at 450 linear feet north of northwest corner of Peoria and 132nd Avenue. And we have planner Mr. Hobart Wingard.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Like the chair said, this is a presentation for Milam Glass at Skyway. This facility has decided to move one of their locations to our city. In general, this is located in the southeastern corner of the city, near the intersection of Dysart and Peoria roads. And you can, the blue line, you can kind of see where the edge of the city is. And this is located just in the Skyway Business Park. It's a employment PAD. A little bit closer in, you can see that this is just one lot up from Peoria Avenue. And also, you might recognize this site just to the north of it. Last month, we did a site plan for Phoenix Distribution to work in through there. This is the proposed site plan. And this is a 2.8 acre site. Proposed is approximately a 22,000 square foot facility, along with the associated parking. And then parking for up to, is required 47, and they provided 51 spaces for this facility. The main access is, there's 2 accesses off of 132nd Avenue. And in this little area located below, and this is something we discussed before about shared access, and just to bring that up, this is ready for the next property to the south. As these are smaller parcels, shared access is very important to make sure that we have the distance between entries. So this is ready for the next project to the south. Also, there is existing sidewalks along the 132nd, and this is providing just basically pedestrian access to the front door of the facility, as this is not much of a street visit type facility. And there will be 6-foot walls around the yard portion of the facility. These are decorative walls that will match other facilities in the area. And also along the parking is going to be a 3.5-foot parking screen wall, which is typical for parking. Now the elevations, this is a opportunity for the applicant to show their wares, if you will. This is a glazing company, and they're using this as not only their offices and their cutting facilities, but also to display their wares. And just the architecture, windows on all sides. And this picture, the 3D rendering, really shows that this is a really outstanding architecture building that's just going to add to the inventory that we have in the Skyway Business Park with the Rio Glass and other projects. Landscaping, typical of what's happening along the 132nd Avenue. And with that, I can answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Why don't we start with Commissioner Bash?
No questions.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Smith?
No questions.
Commissioner Rosenbaum?
No questions.
Vice Chair Keating?
No questions. I'm very happy to see a renewed interest in development in this business park. I've had my eye on this business park for a number of years, and very exciting to see new projects coming online. Thank you.
Commissioner Coldham?
Just a few comments. First, This is the district that I live within, and I drive by this location all the time. This will be a great addition to this part of that region. And to know that with our local high schools, both charter and public, I know that there are great opportunities for internships for our high schoolers, especially the architectural program from Shadow Ridge High School, specifically with this company. So looks very, very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Norberg.
No questions, thank you.
I have no questions. We have any further discussion from the commission? Seeing none, then I'd entertain a motion.
Move to recommend approval of a site plan for Milam Glass at Skyway Business Park.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Please vote.
Motion passes 7 votes in favor.
Thank you. Our next item on the agenda, item number 4, is a consideration and action approving a site plan for Hiyoshi Restaurant at Surprise Village Marketplace, generally located on the southeastern corner of Bell Road and State Route 303. And we have again Hobart Wingard, planner.
Good evening once again, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. This is a presentation for the Hayashi restaurant. As you may remember, this facility was open in the city right up where State 48 is located, and we're near Litchfield and Bell Road. And they have decided upon the Surprise Village Marketplace, the Sam's Club area for their new build. Now, just a little bit closer in to show you, this is within the Surprise Village Marketplace PAD, which is a commercial PAD, adjacent to multifamily residential, the Northwest Ranch PAD, and across the street from Sun City Grand. And just to show you where in that site where this is located. And this area is truly what we call a plug and play. A lot of the parking, the sidewalks, a lot of that infrastructure is already put in. So basically this is just infilling that pad. Just to give you an overview of the master site plan for this facility, of course, we have the Sam's Club and several of the other that shown in blue. These are built facilities. In yellow are facilities that are under construction or have been entitled at this point. And as you can see in the green, just on either side of Sam's Club, that's what's left. So we're really building out this facility here. And then, of course, tonight we're talking about the Hayashi, which is central, right off the main entrance into the facility. Just to show you what we're talking about with the plug and play, the parking is installed, the sidewalks. And before I go on, I just wanted to point out the sidewalk on the eastern side, how you can see this is not a public street. This is an alignment. It is a private drive, and those existing sidewalks are right on the street. And that will come around again when I talk about the conditions for this project. Now, this is the site plan. The restaurant is about 6,100 square feet. There's also an additional 1,100 square feet for storage or for even an opportunity for a small business to use to the south of the building. Parking, it appears to be a lot of parking, and it is a lot of parking. This is typical of a commercial subdivision, shared parking. So all of this is mostly going to be Sam's Club parking, but it's just shared with a ratio of about 101 vehicle for 250 gross floor area. Now showing now is the existing sidewalks, and you'll notice that the only place that the existing sidewalk wasn't located is along this site. And this in the green is showing what was proposed. Now this leads to our condition A, which is to pull that sidewalk back to the street. There was an attempt to pull that back in along the building. There's concerns. One's for the balance of the streetscape. We have an existing streetscape that shows that on one side. Another one is this is about 15 feet, between 10 and 15 feet off the road. And with the intense landscaping, this is a bit of a hiding spot. So with septet principles, you know, it's recommended that that would be put out. So with condition A, that relocates the sidewalk back to the street, so it where it belongs. And I'd also like to point out that this little portion will lead to the existing trellis that is part of the pedestrian circulation in this facility. Now, the elevations of the building, using the same materials that Sam's Club uses, same color palette. You know, this is a mixture of stone, masonry, and ephes. And this is the top is the eastern one. This is along the aisle, so it's not the front of the building, but you'll notice that there have been adornments on there to make this a four-sided architecture. Now, again, we said that there's about 10 to 15 feet in there, and there's going to be some intense landscaping along there. And then if you'll notice that we have service stores back here. And so what one of the conditions is, in condition C, is to add faux windows onto those, so that it doesn't appear to have be a utility door. It looks more, and it contributes to the four-sided architecture. Landscaping is desert tolerant. Also, you'll notice along the northern edge that there's quite a bit of landscaping. This is also where the patio is, you know, which being on the north side of the building takes advantage of the sun, you know, so there's going to be a lot of shade provided there. Also along the eastern edge is going to be thick landscaping, including yellow bells that will actually really help soften that building and provide an atmosphere for this facility. Just to point out, to the southeast is that multifamily, or the assisted living facility, which is going to house quite a few. So we see that, or foresee a active pedestrian market through this area. And with that, I can answer any questions. We have conditions A through E.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we start with Commissioner Keating, Vice Chair Keating.
No questions.
Commissioner Coldham.
No questions. It looks really good. Thank you.
Commissioner Norberg.
Yes, I do have some questions. Not actually about the Hayachi, which I'm actually very excited if the owner's here that this is going in. I was very disappointed when it closed down a while ago. My concern is more about the stop sign and the stop light that is in that intersection. That stop light is the only way to get back onto Bell going left. And I'm in that shopping center quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
When you're going out and turning left, that light stays red, it seems like forever. And today when I was there 2:30 in the afternoon, the line was backed up all the way to the stop. So people, they were all stopped and couldn't move any farther until that light turned red. So a couple of questions. Number one, about the stop sign or the stop light. Is there a way of monitoring that so that it turns green a little bit more often for those people turning left onto Bell? And then second, the stop signs at that four-way stop is very strange. So the one where you're turning left, up on the north side, when you're turning left and you want to get onto Bell, that stop sign, it seems like it's so many feet back from the actual curb. And nobody, while I was stopped there for just a few minutes, not one person stopped at that stop sign. They all pull forward to the end of the curb. So I'm wondering if there is anything that you're going to be able to do with this, because it's a very different looking way that they have all of those stop signs situated. You know, for example, when you're coming out of the Denny's that's going to be going in there in the Verizon store, the stop sign is right over the crosswalk. So you're actually stopped in the middle of the crosswalk. So I'm just wondering if you guys plan on doing anything about those. Other than Hayachi, I have no questions.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, just going back to the stop sign or the stoplight, the Bell Road stoplights are on a system that are monitored and are updated frequently to make sure that the resistance is least. So what I plan on doing is going back, because we still have civils drawings and building permits to go through, to talk to the transportation department about that stop sign, make sure that that is up to its ultimate potential. Now the stop signs, that again, I'm going to talk to transportation and see. This did go through a traffic impact analysis, but absolutely we'll look at that as part of the civil drawings.
Okay, thank you. Because when I am there and looking at everything, so we have that shop next to Taco Bell that hasn't gone in yet, so that's going to increase traffic. We have the restaurant, we have the Denny's that hasn't opened yet, and the other business that's going on the other side there, and then the self-storage. So there's going to be a lot more traffic going through there, and I am just really concerned that that light, I know that they're going through it, but I certainly hope that they do take into consideration everything that's going to be going in there, including the future retail on the other side of Sam's.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, yeah, very understandable, and I will relay those,
Great.
that request.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Commissioner Rosenbaum.
I share Commissioner Norberg's concerns about the stop because I've been there and experienced the same thing pretty much. Want to compliment everyone on the interconnectivity of everything. That'll soften that whole area up, and I know there's going to be a lot of traffic there. I am extremely happy to see Hayashi's coming back. Couldn't get a good Japanese dinner anyplace else in town. So thanks.
Thank you.
Commissioner Smith.
I have no comments.
Commissioner Bash.
No comments.
I have no comments, but with that, is there any further discussion? Seeing none, then I would entertain a motion.
I move to approve the site plan for Hayachi Restaurant at Surprise Village Marketplace, subject to stipulations A through E, as listed in the staff report.
A second.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Could you please vote?
Motion passes 7 votes in favor.
Okay, thank you. On item number 4, I am moving item 4 down to follow after item number 7.
Five.
Oh, excuse me, item 5. I'm moving item 5, excuse me, down to right after item number 7. So at this point, we are going to have item number 6, and this requires a public hearing. There's a presentation action regarding a rezone of a PUD overlay for Paradise Acres Commercial Center, generally located along the eastern edge of Reams Road and between Paradise Lane and north of Terra Buena Lane to the south. And we have a presentation again by Mr. Weingart.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, commissioners. Tonight is a project that's been a long time coming. This is the Paradise Acres Commercial Center. And this is located off of Reams Road, just south of Bell. And a little bit closer in, Paradise Acres itself is about a 75-acre rural residential community that the residents of there have for many years. I've been here 12 years, and it's been an issue that they want to retain their rural lifestyle in this area. And so every attempt previous, there have been attempts to commercialize the Reams portion. But as you can see, there is a high school that is along the eastern border, and there's been many concerns by the residents. You know, one is if you can just imagine a fast food restaurant going on the corner of Terra Buena Lane and Reams Road, that you would have probably a row of 2,000 teenagers walking through this neighborhood. So back in 2014, staff and an applicant for a residential facility did a rezone of a portion of this to medium density residential to allow for assisted living facility. That project never did go through, but that property is part of this rezone. To show you the adjacent zoning, as much of the city's surprise property as this is PAD. As you can see in the yellow, the whole Paradise Acres, except for that little blue 1.5 acre, is rural residential. There's commercial to the south. And just to show you the general plan of this area, and this is located in the neighborhood character pattern. And this is just some language out of the general plan that shows that neighborhood land character pattern covers most of the city. But that doesn't mean that it's all residential. It does support locally oriented businesses like such that is the type that is proposed for here, more of a low impact local types of businesses. The existing zoning, as we said, is rural residential with that little piece of medium density residential. And what is proposed tonight is to change that to CN, which is like a C1, very low intensity commercial with a PUD overlay. The PUD overlay is going to control some of the uses that go into this area. So we are talking about assisted living. You know, we have on here barbershops, galleries, museums, medical offices, and, you know, staff, you know, sees most likely there's going to be more of like offices and possibly even assisted living in this area. At your desk is an email from a resident that was recently received by staff, but as we do, we did have an outreach, and this gentleman owns a property adjacent to the facility, and his concerns were more about the wall, the location of the wall, and which is a staff concern as well. And so while we have that in there, we're not necessarily proposing to put that in the middle or something. We want to take this as a logical approach, because if there is a wall there already and you put another wall interior, you're going to make a little bit of a dead space. And there again, I'm going back to the SEPTED principles where we don't want to make any blind spots or anything like that. But something like this, staff would take every opportunity to make sure that that the area would, the wall would be pushed back to some degree, and there would be landscaping, so there would be adequate buffer. In this case, it would be, there is a 24-foot landscape area, and there's allowable up to 8-foot masonry decorative wall. This doesn't mean it has to be 8 foot, it could be 6 foot, it could be 4 foot. Also in the email, the gentleman referenced one of the uses, which is animal hospital, which, you know, staff understands could be, even though it's limited to be indoors, could be a issue with noise and would not have a problem striking that use from this PUD. Like a summary just said, there's been a long history of speculative development of this area. And then in 2014, council tasked staff to come up with a solution. We have had outreaches and spoke with a lot of the people, and I think we have a really good consensus of a lot of this. In fact, we've had some of the landowners come afterwards and wanting to add to this. And we will look at that after this rezone and see if that is appropriate for this area. Our citizen review meeting was March 8th. We had a good turnout, and it was about 50-50 where we had the property owners and we had residents, and we had a great discussion about what was necessary. And that's when we decided we had a bigger buffer, We talked about the 8-foot wall. We also talked about the number one concern, which was the traffic. And one of the concerns was right now, a lot of traffic goes in there and it's just a turnaround. And there was something that staff could do immediately, and traffic went out there, and we now have no through street signs on there to discourage any traffic to go through there. But also, this is an alert for staff to when something comes in, when a commercial project does come in, access is going to be paramount. We're going to look at where those access points are going to be. And the citizen review meeting was just excellent, as there were so many ideas brought out. Even the idea about taking Tierra Buena and Paradise, curving them in, and having the streets come off of them so that traffic would be directed to the commercial, and the streets would, the Tierra Buena Paradise that go to the residential would go off of that to discourage. So there was a lot of good discussion, and a lot of it we wrote down, and we are keeping in mind for when that that project does come through. And with that, I can answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Why don't we start this time with Commissioner Rosenbaum?
I know this has been an interesting piece of property for a long period of time. As I recall, there have been a number of signs that have gone up and then gone back down. So I'm happy to see this project coming in, and I appreciate all the work that you folks have done. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Smith.
I have no questions.
Commissioner Bash.
Just a comment, I think it's consistent with the area, and I'm glad to see that something is moving forward in that area.
Commissioner Norberg.
I have actually been one of the people that turned in there and didn't realize it couldn't go through. Now I know not to do that anymore. You did mention the exclusion of the animal hospital, but could you also add, for the record, the boarding facility as well, as he has in his statement or email? Thank you.
Commissioner Coldham.
I'm pleased to see, with the long history, that this piece of property will have a really productive and beneficial use. Having been dusty, dirt blown, garage sales, a variety of things in this region and area, I'm just very encouraged with the project. So kudos to the team as well as to the company developing. Thank you.
Vice Chair Keating.
I don't have any questions right now because I think you've covered a lot, but I might, after potentially hearing from the public, to see what they have to say after all the work that you've already done.
Okay, thank you. This does call for a public hearing. If there's anyone that is in our audience today that would like to speak, this would be the time to do so. Do we have anyone, Madam Secretary?
We have James Holman.
James Ullman. Would you, I think we have your name now on the record, but if you'd like to state your name.
I am the one that sent the email,
Okay.
and I just want to reiterate my concerns. One, I don't think I agree with the 8-foot wall, and I agree with the 24-foot buffer area. That's not a lot between a commercial zone, but this is a restricted commercial zone. I understand that. But I am very concerned about where that wall would end up being, because I'd hate to have that wall end up adjoining my property line, and basically I have no buffer at all. I'd just like something stipulated of where that, how that buffer's laid out and where that wall is and how high it is. Definitively, in other words. That's my number one concern. My number two concern is the kennel, boarding facility, animal hospital, whatever you want to call it. I can't think of anybody that would want it, adjoining their house. I think in a standard commercial zone that has the appropriate setbacks from a residential area, it's not out of bounds. I just don't see it here immediately adjoining a deal. And staff, I believe, agreed with me when they thought about it. He wouldn't have a problem with it. But I'd like to see those things incorporated into the paperwork so that we don't have a problem down the road with them wanting to put the block wall on the property line or put in a kennel. That's my two big concerns. Other than that, I wouldn't mind seeing the dust go away a bit.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Are there any other persons that would like to speak at this time? You see none? May Mr. Wingard, a question here on the concerning the uh, wall and the PUD that we're looking at. The wall, would that be taken care of at a site plan, or would that be taken care of at this time?
Mr. Chair, that could be taken care of at this time if we stipulated that wall be set back, say, to a 1-to-1 setback. So if it's 8 foot high, it could be set back 8 foot, or something similar to that effect, putting it in the middle of the 20-foot setback.
Would that be wise to do that now? I'm looking at people coming in individual sites, even though we have that long area there, that would they put in those walls as they come in with their site plans that we would approve, or would you require the same kind of wall and height and I guess distance?
Mr. Chair, no, it's a great question, and that's why we were reluctant to actually set an absolute value of where that wall goes. As I said, we do not want to make any dead spaces or areas of that, but it is noted that we will, at the site plan stage, ensure that we would not put that wall right up against the residential portion, that would be set back in a reasonable distance and with landscaping, decorative wall with landscaping.
Okay, and the second concern was deleting the animal. And I think, would we need a motion for that? Our legal attorney, Mr. Bronsky.
Mr. Chairman, yes, for each of those items, you're going to need
Okay.
you're going to need a proposed stipulation.
Okay. If there's any discussion by the commission on these two items.
Yeah, one question regarding the citizen's concern about the wall, and you say we need to put in a reasonable setback. I'm sure his concern is what's reasonable to one person may not be reasonable to another person. So I don't know whether a 1-to-1 setback would be, satisfy the resident. And if it would, then we could stipulate that at this point in time. And then as a site plan, that would be part of the setback of that particular piece of property. So I don't know if you can ask
Mr. Chair,
resident.
Commissioner, yes, sir. Yes, we can ask the resident to step up.
Thank you. I don't mind. I'd like to see it at least in the middle of the buffer so that both sides get the effect of the buffer and not just being one. I don't like the 1-to-1 idea, because if the 4-foot wall gets approved, then we got a 4-foot wall right there and commercial. I've been in business long enough to know that commercial is not the same as residential, no matter how you swing it. And a definitive, whether it be a 6-foot wall or an 8-foot wall, but at least in the center of the buffer zone.
Okay.
It would be what I'm asking for, which I think would probably be positive for all parties involved. That's my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wingard, could you pull that map up that we're looking at, the Paradise Valley, and show us on the map how it is that you would be proposing this wall?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. If I'm not mistaken, this is Mr. Holman's property
Yes, the one right there.
right here.
You got it.
So what is proposed now in the document is that there's a 24-foot setback that would come in through here, and that is a landscape buffer for this area. And what Mr. Holman is asking for is to put that in the middle.
So that would be a 14-foot setback for the fence. And would we stipulate the height of the fence at that time? Would we say 8 foot, or could we say 8 foot and have it 12 feet? And I understand what you're trying to do as far as allow the buffer, the maximum amount of developable land toward, Reams with that, as far as where they could situate the buildings. But we need to come to some, we can't, it has to be 8 foot. Is it 14 foot from the line? Is it 8 foot wall, 10 foot from the line? Whatever we can agree on that would make sense for both parties is what we should try to achieve as far as a stipulation.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, yeah, staff understands and would be able to put that in the middle of that, so a setback of that. What we would like to do is to keep the 8-foot maximum, as commercial can go up to 10 feet, and we also do not want to,
I just assume keep it at 8 too.
yeah, eliminate any view shed problems. So if we were to have a stipulation, having that in the middle of that 14 feet back from the residential setback line, staff would have no issue with that.
Okay, could I ask a question about any business that might come in there that basically we're gaining, 6 feet? Somewhere of space that they will lose in order that they can't construct a building on if we do the 14 foot instead
Mr.
of
Chair,
8 foot?
well,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, the buffer distance is remaining the same of the let me just go back to the 24 feet. That is remaining the same.
Okay.
Okay, so so half of that, and a mistake is 12 feet.
12 feet.
Yes, sir.
So if we move it 12 feet, there's still the 24-foot setback. Is that what we're saying? Okay.
Chairman, if I may ask a question real quick of the Mr. Holman, does your house back up? Does your property back to that? Or do you front on that?
It's not back to it. It fronts on it.
Okay. Thank you.
So I'm looking at it.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments this time? Then I think we need to take an action motion if we could build one. And Madam Bronsky, I know that you're always working on stuff like this, but I think that we can take a vote. Basically, we were looking at the exclusion or deletion of the any applicant that might want to build or construct animal hospital or animal type activities there. And then we have a desire to have a 12-foot wall that will still require the 24-foot setback.
An 8-foot wall.
So it'd be 8-foot wall, excuse me, and 12-foot setback. And in general, that's kind of what we're looking for. Maybe we can get.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the land use would be animal hospitals, clinics, boarding facilities.
Yes.
So make sure
Yes.
that that's all inclusive.
Please repeat.
Animal hospitals, clinics, and boarding facilities.
Okay, anytime that we want to, if you read them, then we can have a discussion and then see if we want to add that as a stipulation.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, shall we take these one at a time?
Yes, that'd be good.
All right, the first one is stipulation, what letter is this? F?
D.
D, okay. Stipulation D, no animal hospitals, clinics, or boarding facilities shall be allowed in this PAD. Did you want to discuss that one?
Any comments from any? Okay.
We need to vote on that stipulation at this point.
If we don't have any abstention, then we'll vote on both of them at the same
Okay.
time. maybe while we're waiting, why don't we go ahead and take a vote on the first stipulation? We have a motion.
I move to approve stipulation D as stated by the Assistant City Attorney.
I second.
So moved and seconded. You please vote.
Motion passes 7 votes in favor.
Okay, thank you. And then we have another stipulation.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, how about the 8-foot perimeter wall on the east side of the property shall be no closer than 12 feet from the property line?
Do you have any discussion? Seeing none, then this would be stipulation E.
Mm.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, okay. If we could please have a motion.
I move to accept stipulation E as so stated.
I second.
It's moved and seconded. Any discussion? Please vote.
Motion passes 7 votes in favor.
Thank you. Now, do we have any further discussion? If not, then I'd entertain a motion for our item number 6.
I move to recommend approval to the mayor and city council regarding the rezone with PUD overlay for Paradise Acres Commercial Center, subject to stipulations A, B, and C as listed in the staff report.
With the addition of stipulations.
With the additions of stipulations
D and E.
D and E.
And, you know, before we second that,
Okay.
are there any further comments from the public? We got an open public meeting. If not, then I'll close the public hearing, and then I'll entertain a second.
Second.
Oh, excuse me.
I just said thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. We've had the a first, if we would do that again. Whoever made.
A gentleman who has a question.
I'm sorry, I can't see back there. Somebody could stand up or wave. Okay, could you please come up and state your name for the record, and then.
I've never been to one of these, so.
If you could come over and speak in the microphone, that would be good.
My name is James Frizzell. I live in the community. I've lived there since 2005. I've been nice to have not a lot of traffic and stuff during that time, but it's all changing. And y'all don't seem to do any talking about impact on the traffic. We're talking now having a facility that's going to have mobile homes, trailers, and all that coming in on Bell Road, right there about where Fry's grocery store is. And it's one of the worst places in the world to get out of traffic at night or in the morning. I can't even go to church on Wednesday night. The traffic's so bad, and it's not a stoplight at that facility out there that you can get out on the Bell Road without going somewhere you shouldn't be. I have to go all the way over where Safeway's at, where they have a stoplight over there, and I can get out in the traffic. You can't get out in the traffic on Bell Road. You've got those new facilities where y'all put islands down the middle, and people are now doing U-turns, and you can't get out. They'll start doing a U-turn, and it blocks the whole area. You got all those new restaurants there. You got all the Fry's gas station there, and you got all those other facilities that are coming up over there, donut shop and all that. And you got people coming down Bell instead of what they're not supposed to be making U-turn. They're making U-turns and blocking the whole thing out.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a concern that I'm sure we'll send to our transportation people. Because
Well,
I understand
we wrote a letter to transportation people, and they said they had to come to y'all.
Yeah.
And
Well,
we don't have, like I said, we're in that community. We have a stoplight out of that. We have to go all the way over Bullard
yeah.
to get on the other side of the road because there's no stoplights. We can get out anywhere in that neighborhood. And like I say, I've been there since the beginning of the neighborhood.
Okay, thank you for your comments, and we'll share that with our transportation department. We have a motion. Yes, why don't we restate it for the record, and then we'll close our public hearing.
I
there no
move to
other-
recommend approval to the mayor and city council regarding the rezone with PUD overlay for Paradise Acres Commercial Center, subjects to stipulations A, B, C, and D as listed in the staff report, and adding D and E also.
Do I have a second? Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Will you please vote?
Motion passes 7 votes in favor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wingard. Our next item, number 7, is a consideration and action on the conditional use permit to allow a new mini warehouse facility on Sierra Verde parcel 11, generally located at north of Waddell Road and west of Litchfield Road. And this also requires a public hearing, and we have our planner, Sergio Angula. Yes, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. So this is a presentation of the conditional use permit for a mini warehouse facility in Sierra Verde. Here's the site. So it's generally located west of Litchfield Road, north of Waddell Road in the Sierra Verde development, just north of the Fry's Shopping Center. So here's a close-up of the site. So it's just roughly 4.8 acres. And east of 140th Drive and west of Litchfield Road. So it kind of stretches from one collector to the other street on the east side. As you can see there, the lot layout, it kind of so this site encompasses 3 different lots. So to go ahead and fix that, the applicant is also proposing a replat of these lots to go ahead and adjust the lot lines to make sure that we don't have a building going over different property lines. This final plat is a part of this application, but will be voted on by City Council at a later date. So here's the zoning of the site. So the zoning is PAD with employment uses. Just a little bit of the history on the zoning of this site. So in 2003, there was a rezone to the site to go ahead and disallow any residential uses because this falls within the noise contours of Luke Air Force Base, which as per state statute, they don't allow any residential uses. So this PAD zoning allows any type of use starting from commercial all the way up to industrial. So the proposed use, a mini warehouse facility, is permitted with a CUP on this site. So just to go back to the zoning, to the south, you have additional PAD commercial zoning. To the west, single family PAD commercial zoning, and this is all part of the Sierra Verde PAD. To the eastern, you have single family residential zoning, and the Safeway shopping center on the northeast corner of Waddell and Litchfield, that's zone C2 or community commercial. The applicant is proposing to build this in 2 different phases. What you see there in the blue color is part of phase 1. So all the improvements, all the landscaping, the parking spaces, and the 2 buildings that will face each of the streets along the west and the east side will be part of phase 1. The only part that's going to be part of phase 2 are the three additional buildings along the south side of the property. So here's the proposed site plan. As you can see here, there's 2 access points, one off of Litchfield Road on the east side and one off of 140th Drive on the west side. And going in, you can see that the applicant is proposing a future shared access drive to the property to the north for any future development. That way you don't have separate driveways too close to each other on each other's streets, which have caused traffic problems in the past. So they would be sharing that access points to get to the properties to the north. So this here is showing the gates of the facility. Being a storage facility, obviously all the storage units will be gated to the entrance. Those arrows there are showing the direction of access. So on the southeast gate, that's both exit and entrance. Just north of that, that's just an entry gate. And the gate on the west side, that's just an exit onto 140th Drive. As I mentioned earlier, those are the two future shared access points. Now the buildings, so building A would be their main building. This is where they will have their offices and the registration desk. So there's public parking in front of that, and also a pedestrian pathway that leads to the existing sidewalk on Litchfield Road. And so to the interior and to the west side, you have the rest of the buildings, which would not be climate control, just your typical storage units. And the storage units in building A, those are proposed to be climate control and all indoors. The applicant is also proposing RV covered parking spaces, which is permitted by the zoning code in this zoning district. And also additional parking spaces within the facility to allow for those that are dropping off items to have a parking space. Also, you will see here that the driveways within the facility are also very wide. So this allows for vehicles to park along the storage units, drop off their items without blocking access to the rest of the customers on the site. This is a proposed landscape. So along 140th Drive and Litchfield Road, the applicant is just proposing to continue the same landscape palette and plant species that are occurring to the south, just to continue with that same design pattern. Also continuing the sidewalks along both of those streets, which whenever the development to the north comes along, they will need to continue that as well. This is a proposed elevation for their main building. So this is building A, and this is the side that faces Bell Road. As you could tell from the details provided, they use a similar color palette as the Fry's Shopping Center does. And on the street elevation, on the street side elevation, they added full windows and wall pop-outs to add to the detail and to kind of take away from that storage typical feeling and look, and giving it a more of an office type of look and feel to this facility. So here's building B. This is the building that faces onto 140th Drive on the west side. And on the side that faces the street and the residential to the west, they did the same thing. They added more detail, full windows to give it more of an office look and not so much of a storage facility look. And this is one of the buildings on the south side that will be built under phase 2. If you look at the south elevation, this middle elevation here, that would be facing the shopping center to the south. And so they are continuing the same amount of detail on these buildings as well. There's building D, also being built as phase 2. And here's building E, which is also part of phase 2. The applicant held a citizen outreach meeting in December 28 last year. And at that meeting, there was a mixture of comments. Some were in support, some were had some concerns and stated their opposition, mainly because of the use itself. Sorry. So some residents felt that there was too many storage facilities here in the city. And the applicant explained that their market study demanded another one in that location. And just by taking a look at the other existing facilities, they seem to be doing pretty well and are pretty much full. Others in support, there was a gentleman that stated that he thought it was a good idea that they are providing RV storage. That would help keep all the RVs off the residential streets. And others mentioned that it was also quiet and low intensity use compared to the other type of uses that could have possibly gone into the site. So other than the meeting, we did receive a few phone calls as well with the same concerns, and also a letter from one of the residents just a few days ago having the same concerns about the use itself. So overall, there was a mixture, both in support and others in opposition to the use. With that, staff's recommendation is of approval, subject to stipulations A through C, as listed in the staff report. And I'd be glad to answer any questions that you may have at this moment.
This does call for an open public hearing, and with that, do we have anyone that would like to speak?
Bill Allison.
Thank you. If you'd please state your name and speak into the mic, we would appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, sir. For the record, Bill Allison. I'm the attorney for the applicant, and I just wanted to address stipulation A if I could. Stipulation A limits the time for the approval for 1 year, so the construction has to begin within 1 year of the approval. And although we think that we'll probably be under construction within a year, there's always the possibility that there are circumstances beyond either our control or the city's control that could in fact slow that down. Our only concern is, rather than coming back through this full process in a year, if that doesn't happen, if we could have some additional time, up to 2 years, that would be helpful. That way we know we can go to construction and get this project started.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just as a piece of information, our illustrious attorney, Mr. Bronski, is that possible that we can extend that time period or not under the rules?
As long as it's not a code provision, and we've just discussed that it's not. We being the community development director, myself, then you can certainly extend that.
Thank you.
I have a question regarding that. Are we setting a precedent that we're going to allow people to have longer than a year? Or are we going to have these requests on future projects as a result of this action? So I have that comment, that concern.
Chairman Commissioner Smith, we're pretty consistent with our CUPs being good for a year if they don't act on them. But again, there's no code provision that says you cannot extend it. So it's kind of up to the commission.
Yeah, I think previously, if I'm remembering that right, that can be corrected, is this individual case, is this case doesn't set a precedent for the future cases?
Mr. Chairman, conditional use permits are very site specific, so I don't think we have a big worry about it setting any precedent. It's really up to the decision of the council. I mean, the planning commission.
Any further comments?
Mr. Chair, we were just discussing another option that you might want to pursue is to give them 1 year with an opportunity for a 1 year extension.
Thank you.
So they need to come back in and
ask for the extension.
Yes.
And ask for the extension.
Now, okay.
That would be better.
Before we move on with the discussion, are there any other persons that would like to speak on this matter? None? Is there, if there's someone out in the audience that didn't fill out a form, you're welcome to come up. If you'd please state your name and speak into the mic, we'd appreciate it.
Thank you. My name is Erica Martinez, and I am a resident of the community there. I did attend the December hearing, and I did have some concerns about the storage facility that's being built. I don't know what the benefits really are for the community itself being there in that specific lot. My children take the bus from that 140th Avenue where the exit of the storage would be at. And I don't think that it would be very beneficial for a storage facility to be right in front of the bus stop. Also, there's a green belt with a park there. It kind of blocks a lot of kind of the view of where the green belt and the park is at. It takes out the residential kind of purposes of the whole community. Also, I think about the traffic there, the traffic that's going to be coming out and in. There's only that 140th Avenue. There's a lot of kids playing there all the time. It's just really going to take away that really kind of residential atmosphere. So I was wondering if there's maybe another lot that they can build in, or if this is something that's set in stone now, or...
We're going to discuss that.
Okay.
But thank you for your comments.
Those are my concerns. Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak on this behalf? Hearing none, then why don't we open our discussion with Mr. Smith. Why don't you go ahead and...
Well, I have no questions regarding the project. I do think that if we grant a extension, it should be come back in after 1 year. I think that would be better than saying we'll give you a 2-year extension. That's my only comment.
Okay. Commissioner Bash.
No comment.
Commissioner Rosenbaum.
I share some concerns about the egress onto 140th Drive. I'm sure that the planners have looked at those concerns and about the fact that there is a planned recreation area, basically a greenbelt across the street there. I would think that having the school district can, of course, move its bus stops from one place to another, and that may be a way of at least taking that part of it out. I don't think that there's going to be any way of keeping that heavy traffic, which is basically what it's going to be from the RVs, off of 140th. So that's a concern for me also. Other than that, I have nothing else.
Thank you, Vice Chair Keating.
I think my concerns were already raised. I would like to address Ms. Martinez, though, about your concerns about, could something else be built there? I guess what we have to look at from the commission standpoint is that the people that purchased that land purchased it because it was zoned for those kinds of uses. And I don't think there's probably anything that we could do to change, if residential might have been more something more appealing to what you were hoping to have there, but that would have had to have been right from the start. So I'm afraid there's nothing that we can do to change. That's I would say, if anything, like some of the comments earlier, this use is actually kind of safer in many ways as some of the uses that could have been decided upon with people that purchased this property. So I'm sorry that that you feel this way, but I'm afraid there's probably nothing we could do to change that at this point.
Commissioner Coldham.
I appreciate the previous comments by the commissioners. They pretty much echo the concerns that I have, as well as Vice Chair Keating. Thank you for your comments.
Commissioner Norberg.
Yes, I do have a couple of questions. As Commissioner Rosenbaum was talking about that, the exits here, the future access, how is that going to work with people having to stop at the gate? Say they're coming out. Is there going to be another stop sign for them as soon as they come out to allow people to turn in and out of that, or am I looking at that wrong on those future shared accesses?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, so the gate on the west side, those accesses there is only for exit. It's exit only. On the north side, that one's entrance only. On the northeast side, that one's entrance only. So as the traffic comes in off of Litchfield, they will be going north and then either turning into the facility or continuing north. I'm not sure.
Okay, so when they're leaving, in other words, what you're saying off of 140th Drive, you can only exit off of that. You cannot enter onto that.
Right.
Okay, I'm sorry, I misunderstood that. And then I also had another question. On page 3 of 5, it has the project descriptions, and on 3, it talks about the fencing and screening. And it says on 3A, there's property and constructed decorative concrete block or chain link fence. Is there any photo of what that chain link fence with the slats would look like, or do we decide today, because it does say as approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission, are we supposed to be deciding tonight either or are we just saying either or? Because personally, if I lived there, I would prefer a decorative concrete block, definitely on 140th instead of a chain link fence.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, yes. So the applicant is proposing a decorative masonry wall to match those buildings along the south side. So if you look along here between buildings E and D, that wall there would actually be a continuance of the same materials as a building, the same as what is being proposed between buildings D and C and so on. They did submit wall examples, wall exhibits with their site plan. That way staff could go ahead and make sure that they meet the same design requirements as the building. Another thing that I want to point out are, since this was under PAD, it was approved under previous zoning code, but our SUDC does not allow for chain link fence, so that cancels that out.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you. This is a public hearing. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this issue? Seeing none, then we'll close the public hearing and
Chair, I do have one comment.
oh, yeah, we're not through yet here, but go ahead.
Regarding the gates, Commissioner Norberg kind of brought that to my mind. Are those sliders or swingers?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Bash, the gate here on the southeast side, that one's a slider, the same thing as the gate out here on the east side. The only swing gate is the one on the northeast, and that one swings to the inside of the facility.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there any discussions? I would like, we've discussed whether we should provide a possible extension or an opportunity to come back to us for an extension, or to provide a 2-year request that has been made by the applicant. Time to discuss. What do you think the commission? Let's take the first one, that would be the request for a 2-year ability to contain the building permit before construction starts. Is there anyone that'd like to discuss that?
Yeah, I would prefer 1 year with a 1-year extension. That they
Is
come
there
back.
anyone that has any comments about the 2-year?
No 2 years.
Then let's go to the next one, which has been brought up by Commissioner Smith, is that we have a 1 year as we normally would, with a possible extension of a year. And
Yeah.
what's the desirability? Is anybody?
Adding a 1-year extension, that doesn't add an exorbitant burden upon the developer, does it? If you can't break ground prior to the 1 year, the extension is not that big of a deal for you, right? Not a big hurdle to overcome. Okay. I would certainly prefer that.
Is there any further discussion? Is that pretty much agreed? Okay, so we need to take it as a stipulation. Yes.
Mr. Chair, there's one more point. If we're going to do an extension, does that extension come back to the Community Development Director, or does that come back to the Planning Commission?
I think if we provide that opportunity, I think we can just go directly to our director.
Okay. Then I have proposed language when you're ready.
You have?
I do.
Well, good for you. Thank you. If you'd like to share that with us now. This is stipulation.
This is an amendment to Stipulation A. Stipulation A currently, we would just amend Stipulation A to read as follows. This conditional use permit is valid for 1 year after approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission, with a 1-year extension upon application to the Community Development Director. So that's the amendment to the first sentence, and then the second sentence would be amended to read, this conditional use permit shall expire on the 1-year anniversary of approval unless construction commences or a 1-year extension has been granted prior to that date.
Okay, if we have that information, do we need to vote on this amendment? Okay, if we could have a motion.
I move to amend Stipulation A as read by staff attorney.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Do we have any discussion? Seeing none, then let's vote.
Motion passes 7 votes in favor.
Okay, thank you. Now we can take the item itself. If there is no further discussion, if we could have a motion.
I move to approve the conditional use permit to allow for a new mini warehouse facility in Sierra Verde, parcel 11, generally located north of Waddell Road and west of Litchfield Road. Any further, Ms. Pronsky?
Yes, please, if we could add, subject to stipulations amended A, B, and C as set forth in the staff report.
I couldn't say it any better than you.
We have a motion.
I second.
We have a motion and second. Do we have further discussion? Seeing none, then please vote.
Motion passes 7 votes in favor.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. We'll move on to item number 5 now is a presentation and discussion regarding the proposed text amendment to Chapter 113 of the Surprise Municipal Code regarding signs. And we have Mr. Kufis, our planner, to make a presentation.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. We're here tonight to talk about the draft of the sign code. Certainly being here hopefully means that we're closer to the end than the beginning. There's been a lot of work, and we have a lot of work to do yet. So I wanted to mention that this evening we have Kim Ewers from YESCO and also representing the Arizona Sign Association. So if there's any technical questions regarding signs in general, we have some expertise here that can really speak to that. Also on May 4th, we will have James Carpentier from the International Sign Association, who will also be available to help us with any kind of technical information or questions that may come up. So as stated, we're here to talk about the sign code. We have a number of topics to get through. Now, I anticipate this is going to be a lengthy discussion, which is why I'm sitting. and my thought is we'll go as far as we reasonably can until you can't take it anymore, and then we'll come back on May 4th and finish up. There are some certain things that I do want to be sure that we talk about, some important things, but I've structured this presentation with hyperlinks that allow us to bounce back and forth. We don't have to go through slide by slide by slide. We can bounce back and forth and go where we need to go depending on where the conversation takes us. Our progress to date, we actually began this early in 2015, and this was part of the larger SUDC rewrite. And we were looking at the sign code thinking, there's some things that we could probably do to the sign code to make it a little bit easier to read, to remove some of the inconsistencies. And for instance, window signs are addressed in two different areas of the current sign code. So it gets confusing. And so our initial idea was, let's go in and kind of clean that up and make sure that we're providing enough sign opportunity for the businesses that are out there. So as we were working through all of this, we learned of a U.S. Supreme Court decision. This was Reed versus the town of Gilbert. And that really changed the landscape of signage all across the country. And so it caused us to really put the brakes on this thing. And so we spent the next several months going to various seminars and webinars and training opportunities to get smart on Reed. So we really understood the implications of Reed. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. We then we put together our draft language. We went to the city council on March 7th of this year, and a similar discussion as tonight. Only probably tonight will probably be a little bit more detailed. And then on March 14th, we had James Carpentier, who I mentioned earlier, and another gentleman, Kyle Behrens from Daktronics, came out just right over here in our parking lot and gave us a demonstration on electronic messaging. It was at 8 o'clock at night, so we could really see how the electronic messaging works and how they can dial it in, dial it back, and so forth. And then that brings us to where we are right now on April 20th. We also had a series of outreach meetings. These meetings were held throughout the month of March. We received a fair amount of feedback from that. They were good, productive meetings. And the results of those meetings are basically summarized in your staff report. But we'll work through that a little bit more as we're going through the various slides. Do want to talk a little bit about the Reed decision. If you're not familiar with it, this came down from the U.S. Supreme Court. It involved our friends over in the town of Gilbert, and there was basically a church that was operating out of the local school. And on the weekends, they would put their signs out, directing people into the neighborhood saying, we're having church on Sunday. And it was the manner in which they were doing that was inconsistent with the town's sign code. And so they were cited. And that citation basically was challenged in court. And the court actually upheld the town's ruling, or the town's position on this. And so the pastor of the church appealed. And on appeal, the appellate court supported the town's position. And so, in short, it went all the way up through the system of the U.S. Supreme Court. And U.S. Supreme Court said, "Yeah, you're right, town, you're wrong, and you need to rethink about how you're doing all this." And the idea that came out of this is this notion of content neutrality. And so, we have a couple of signs, and all throughout the sign industry and in our current code, even the way we define signs, a lot of that is content based. We know what a menu board is. Well, we know what a directory is. We know what a billboard is. And those are all content based definitions. But with Reed, the rule of thumb that comes out of it says we have to look at the back of the sign. We can no longer look at the front of the sign. And so that changes a great deal of how we had to structure the code to remain as content neutral as absolutely possible. So with that in mind, working into the structure of the new code, this is pretty self-explanatory. I don't need to go through all of this, but we've organized it in a logical manner. And then moving into some of those different points, under article or chapter or section 113.01 is the titles and the findings and purpose and intent. We really went in and we needed to have a really solid legal foundation for the code itself to make sure that the code is doing what it is intended to do and that what is intended to be done is being done by the code. And so we did get one comment back that that they felt that the language of that code was, or that of that section was maybe a little bit harsh, that it came across as being anti-business, and then that was countered by other commentary where they didn't really feel that way. So, but I think what we might want to do is go through there and just wordsmith it a little bit, because we're certainly not trying to make it out like that signs are all bad. There's certainly a clear need to have appropriate signage in the community. So we may massage that a little bit. The applicability statement, when we first began this, we had this lofty idea that the new sign code would repeal and replace all of the existing sign programs that are out in the city. And then that realized that was going to be a big task. It's going to be a big haul. So the way we wrote this language now is that it leaves in place any of the existing comprehensive sign programs that are out there, such as Prasada or whatever. So those programs remain in place, but it supersedes any previous sign code. So the old Chapter 15 is superseded completely, or any reference to it is completely superseded, or the old 86 code. Those all go away. This new code and to Chapter 113 of the SUD of the Land Development Ordinance goes away, and it's completely replaced by this new code. Then in 113.03, this was language that was really intended to reinforce the ties to the First Amendment and the Reed decision. So again, giving some really strong legal background to the defending the code. In section 113.04, we actually stole this idea from the International Code Council. They're the body that writes the building codes, and they use italicized font. So whenever there is a defined term or word in the definitions, if that word or term is used elsewhere in the code, it's italicized. And that tells the reader that that word means something special in the context of this code. You don't go to the common meaning of the word, you go to the code, or to this code, and that's what that word means in this context. So again, we stole that from the building code writers, but we think it's a little tedious to edit, but we think it's a really useful tool, or will be. And then moving into the definitions, the existing definitions, there's a lot of definitions that are there, but we don't know why, because they're not used anywhere in the text. And then there's stuff in the text that should be defined and isn't. So we went through and just culled everything out, and we rewrote the definitions the way that made sense, that in the context of our code. We also included a number of pictures and graphics that really help the reader understand what it is that we're trying to get to. And we've got some feedback on that, that the pictures and the graphics were very helpful. We also received some comment that in terms of electronic messaging, that we'll talk about that a little bit later, that maybe we only have one level of electronic messaging. So we'll go back in and take a look at that depending on the outcome of this discussion. And then some minor comment that our class 2 sign, that they're actually 45 inches tall, not 40 inches tall, as stated in the code. And then some concerns over temporary signs in the median that we may address through some revisions to the definitions. We included a matrix. This came about as writing through the code. A lot of times, in fact, most times, sign codes are written where they'll say non-residential use in a residential zone, residential use in a residential zone, non-residential use in a non-residential zone, and it gets very repetitive. And I found that the document was getting thicker and thicker and thicker, and then as I would make a tweak or a change to one, so it was just becoming very cumbersome. So we came up with the idea of doing this matrix. So now you find out what your zoning is, you scroll down, and these are the signs that you're allowed to have in that zoning district, subject to whatever the criteria is elsewhere in the code. So this matrix seems to be pretty well received as well. We have a very robust list of both permitted and prohibited signs. And so here's the language on the prohibited signs. And there's a lot of words there. We did have some feedback that possibly and this will be a part of the discussion when we're looking at billboards. The way we structured this is if a sign type isn't addressed in this code, then an individual could go through a comprehensive sign program and either massage the standards that are applied to that code or to that sign, or they could introduce a new sign type that wasn't considered elsewhere in the code. And so if there was an appetite to have billboard signs and whatever, then one way to attack that might be to strike that from the list of prohibited signs. And that's part of the discussion. And we'll have more robust discussion on that later on. Then certain signs prohibited, what was exempt from regulation. So we have basically two categories: your basic public safety type signs, danger stop. Hopefully we don't have too many alligators, but that's the idea. We also had a thought that if you have a bunch of signs within an area that is not visible to the public, are we that concerned about what those signs might look like? And so, in this particular photograph, you got a mural, you've got Paradise Bakery and a bunch of other stuff. It's all focused inward. So now that said, we don't want a big, bright, glowing ball in the middle of the city. So we might need to tone that down just a little bit. Now, moving into 11307, we got some feedback on A in regarding the permits required, and this was had to do with a notion of prior constraint or prior restraint, and it's the idea that a person has to go get permission from their government in order to exercise their First Amendment right, and that wasn't the intent here. Our intent here was a construction permit is required, and the idea there was so that somebody doesn't get electrocuted because it wasn't installed properly, or a 15-foot tall sign doesn't blow down because it didn't meet wind load. That was the intent of that language. So we'll probably go in there and tweak it just a little bit to make sure that that's clear. And then on that very subject here, these are the signs that are exempt from that permit requirement. These are the types of signs that really don't touch the building code. We don't need to worry about them so much. We had some feedback regarding aesthetics. We had a fair amount of discussion regarding aesthetics in the original drafting of this, and it became a little bit of an enforcement issue, and so the language reads the way it is right now, so it'd be in compliance with the construction codes adopted by the city and in effect at the time of construction. That said, there may be some opportunities elsewhere in the code, in this new sign code, to beef up some aesthetics to make the signs maybe a little bit more attractive than what they might wind up being. So we might need to think about how we might accomplish that. We had in 11307 a series of diagrams. We wanted to be able to quantify how to deal with a three-dimensional sign. Here I just grabbed an image of an angel, a statue. We're not trying to say that that statue is a sign, but we're just trying to illustrate the fact that we have a three-dimensional sign, and this is how we would go about measuring it. Similarly, how would you go about when does a sign, when you measure it as a single surface sign, or when does it become two signs? And so this 30-degree angle, if that angle of separation opens up more than 30 degrees, now you're looking at two signs, not one. The monument sign height. This is actually how we do it right now, looking at the height of the monument relative, height of the monument sign relative to the edge of the street, the pavement, the edge of pavement. But we wanted to be clear that there's some areas out on Grand Avenue where there's probably a 3 or 4 foot slope coming off of the street. And if you put a sign down in a 3 or 4 foot retention basin, you're not going to see it. So the idea here is, if you notice, the tops of the sign is all the same level. So we just wanted to have some imagery to convey that. And then how we go about measuring sign area. And we want to spend a little bit of time on that because we did get some feedback on that. In this diagram, this is basically the single rectangle method. And so you draw a box around the sign, and that's how big it is. Or if the sign is just mounted to the wall, you draw a box around the sign, that's how big it is. What we're told from the sign industry is that has a tendency to force everything into a smaller box. And it also limits creativity because everybody just wants to kind of fill the box with as much signage as they can get. So an alternative would be maybe a multiple rectangle methodology. And so if we looked at a Wendy's sign using the single rectangle method, and this is actually to scale, so this would be representative of 6 square units of something. So if we measured each individual letter separately using multiple rectangles, it's the same area, same 6 square feet in this case, but the sign winds up being bigger and more visible. So that might be an opportunity to think about. There's also some language in the International Sign Association, their draft code, that talks about multiple geometric shapes. And my fear with that is, it's very easy, I think, for a designer to be able to work in a CAD system and come up with how big a compound curve is. But when we're sitting doing permit plan review, we're there with a scale and a pencil. And it's very hard to figure out that to that level of detail. So we might be a little bit reticent of going too far with this and just staying with the multiple rectangle method. I think that would probably work for our purposes. Then the frame sign would still be measured the same way. Now there may be some opportunities for ascenders and descenders, some provisions that might allow like the tail of the Y that hangs down. Maybe you don't include that sort of thing. But I think if we worked with the multiple rectangle method, it would probably suit our needs. And then there's some codes have some language that would allow for some bonus provisions for creative sign design. Reading through those, I haven't seen a way to really. They seem very vague to me. I'd like to explore that a little bit more, but they seem very vague. It's hard to regulate. If the sign looks nice, you get more stuff. That's hard to defend in my mind, but we'd like to explore that a little bit more. Now we move into temporary signs. This is probably one of the most difficult things that we've been dealing with. We're all aware of the proliferation of the A-frame signs all over the city. The city council rescinded the policy that allowed them because of the economy that turned down. That's going into effect this weekend. We've been hearing a lot of feedback on that, and people are very concerned about business owners are being very concerned about their ability to operate their businesses if they can't have A-frame signs out on the street. It's a challenge. So kind of trying to work through that, we came up with different classifications of signs, and we did the classification system because we can no longer say real estate sign or whatever. We had to base it off of its physical attributes. So we came up with this class 1 small A-frame type sign, and we did this really to sort of accommodate the real estate industry, because this is the kind of sign that you might see. You might also see a lot of pin signs, but this is the kind of sign that you would see on the street corner. And we set it up 3 per lawful temporary event, and if that was the direction that we wound up wanting to go, then we would go back into the SUDC, look at our list of temporary uses, and dovetail real estate open houses as a temporary use. Then, but the question came up, is 3 enough? And, what is the right number? And we had one commentary that was adequate to the task. And what might be adequate to the task for me in my circumstance might not be for you, and vice versa. So what and how do you regulate adequate to the task? That becomes very arbitrary. So then we got to figure out, well, what is the right number? 3 is probably a little bit light, but is 10 too many? And where do they go? And that's a hard one to, and I think we're probably looking for some feedback from you guys in terms of what you think is an appropriate number of signs. Similarly, with the type 2 sign, the class 2 sign, this is the standard A-frame that we've seen all over the place. The way we set this up was 1 per business, and that would be located within 15 feet of the business entrance. So 2 different scenarios. The small A-frame signs could go out in the street, the right of way, but these would be up next to the business entrance, like right over here at City Cafe. So again, is 1 enough? Is 15 feet too far away? That's a tough one. Then we get into, well, how do you administer it? And so you have 3 signs right here. They're in this graphic. It would be located, if this gray area is the sidewalk, it's located between the sidewalk and the right-of-way line. And you have 3 signs. Code enforcement goes by and says, okay, this is an open house. They're a lawful temporary event. They're fine. And then they move over here to the church service and they say, oh, okay, that's a lawful temporary event. They're fine. And then they move over here to the pedicure thing and say, well, that's not a lawful temporary event. They're not fine. They're not okay. And that could be a real challenge, how to manage that. Is there an argument then to just simply say no signs in the right of way, which is frankly where we started, and make sure that the signs are pushed off onto the onto the private land adjacent to the right of way? And then that goes back to the number of signs. Is 1 enough? Is 10 enough? And so forth. So in this scenario, let's say that that 1 was the number that we chose. 1 sign. You're allowed 1 sign per lot of record. So property A would be in compliance, property B would not be in compliance, and it wouldn't be a matter of what's on the sign. It would be a matter of the property is not in compliance because it has too many signs, plain and simple. Something that requires some discussion. We created another class of sign for obvious purposes without calling it a real estate sign. This is what it was intended for. We also had a conversation with some folks from the Home Builders Association, and they were wondering if there was an opportunity for another type of sign. And thinking about it a little bit more, I believe that that concern could be addressed by this sign. So I think we're probably okay there. Then when we move into the large, the type 4 sign, that we see these around, we know they're there, and there's a reason for them. And so again, perhaps the Home Builders Association, there's maybe want a different configuration of this, or maybe another type of sign that would allow the sign to, when associated with an active subdivision, that might be a little bit more visible from the street. Again, something to talk about. So I don't know how far you want me to go before you want to stop me and yank my tongue out of my face. But all right.
Not too much.
I know I've been living this for 2 years. And it's like, all right, but
and you're saying.
We have other types of signs, temporary signs that we've added into teardrop banner signs, light pole banner signs, just the regular banner, sign walkers, and so forth. I don't know how much detail you want to get into that, but this is not. This is pretty straightforward. We did create here for the pole banner sign. There's a real opportunity for for signs in parking lots and so forth, even on public streets. This can actually create a very festive mood. There's also, I heard somebody say, the absence of sign is an indication of the absence of economic activity. So when you have a pole sign the opportunity for a pole sign and no pole sign there, well, maybe there's an opportunity to put a sign on there and kind of breathe some life into an area. Then we have the teardrop banner signs. We did get a little bit of commentary on that. The way the language reads, it talks about vacant property. That comment came back from the real estate industry because, to me, when I was writing it, it was vacant meant undeveloped. So you have a piece of dirt, that's a different thing, and a real estate agent is going to be more concerned about a vacant house. It has a different connotation. It's a subtle change, a little bit of wordsmithing. I don't think we have a problem with fixing that. So this would be probably a good opportunity to maybe stop and talk about the temporary signs a little bit before we get into some of the other stuff. Like I say, I do want to spend some time, if we have the time, to talk about electronic messaging and billboards, if we have that opportunity. But I'll defer to you and how you'd like to proceed.
All right. Well, commissioners, needless to say, we've heard an awful lot. It's a very thorough presentation.
Thank you.
And you can see a lot of work's gone into it, a lot of feedback from a lot of different folks. And I'm sure you appreciate that and try to help blend in some reasonableness and trying to accommodate our businesses and public. And at the same time, trying to keep some aesthetics and in developing our city and making it look like a really nice place to live. Commissioners, anyone have any questions for Mr. Kufis? Boy.
I just have a comment that it's incredible what you've had to go through the past couple of years to make this understandable to us. But the work that you've done, it's very commendable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have we sorted out land use versus free speech? I mean, is there, in your thinking, as we look at the signage, I noticed that you have one on the street or sidewalk versus on private property. Does private property hold more free speech than if it's on a public surface? I'm not sure I understand it.
Well, I think, Mr. Chairman, I think part of the street versus private property, a lot of that deal goes back to the Reed case and so forth. There is a notion, and I probably am going to want to defer to Donna on this, but there's a difference between commercial speech and non-commercial speech, and I don't know in the current legal environment how that all plays out. I hate to dump on Donna here.
Well, if you have any comments, I mean, or we can do this later. And
How much time do you have?
About 1 minute now.
Actually, in the Reed case, there's been a lot of writing and discussion about whether the Reed case has changed the standing law that's been in effect for 30 years or more on whether or not the commercial speech gets the same level of protection as non-commercial speech. And most of the commentators say that the case does not touch the existing case law and that the rules haven't changed and that First Amendment non-commercial speech gets a higher level of protection. The question is, how long is that going to be the case? Because there are a lot of post-Reed cases going through the courts, and your guess is as good as mine where it's going to come out. We have the unenviable position of being forced to rewrite a sign code in response to a Supreme Court case, which is merely the beginning of a change in the law and the Supreme Court's interpretation of the First Amendment. So all we can do is give it our best shot.
Yeah.
But on the more specific question of the public area versus the private area, when we're in the public area, we need to treat everyone the same. And so that's why we have the opportunity of either allowing very consistent use between the different things in the public realm, or banning everything in the public realm and pushing it onto the private side. And so, and then we have a little bit more flexibility. But bottom line is, Rob and I had a discussion sort of like this morning, and it harkens back to the comment you made, Mr. Chairman, that we need to try to come up with a reasonable balance between the needs of our businesses and others to have signs versus trying to keep the community looking as nice as possible. And we're really going to need to look to you and to the city council and to draw that line, because we don't have a clear legal line.
Yeah. Well, thank you. One of the ones that kind of caught my attention is the open house signs that realtors use and put out on the sidewalks or streets or private land. And three of them, I've noticed in some of our communities, the one I live in, that 3 signs wouldn't be enough to find some of these places because they're back, and they may have to go on 3 or 4 or 5 different streets to find the location of the actual open house. And so at every street junction that you have to make a turn, one would, think that it would be in their interest to do that. So I was trying to think through how do we go about looking at what is reasonable for the type of condition. And I know that you had mentioned length in there. In other words, are we looking at so many signs within a quarter mile or half mile? You're looking at whether it's a busy street here in a city or out in rural America, how many signs do you need? It's pretty, the things that we have to deal with here are all encompassing. And I hope that working with our business community leaders, that I hope that we can put some reasonableness so that they will benefit to the maximum degree they can without infringing on our city and the looks and other kinds of things. So thank you for that. I don't know, are there any?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes and yes. Want me to start? Okay. I'll jump on board with Chair Chapman was saying. I'm reading some of the comments from West Maricopa Association of Realtors. There was an open house in my neighborhood this weekend, and I counted. There were 6 signs from the main road to the home. There were 6 open house signs, and it required 6 signs to find where this home was. Sometimes 1 or 2 will do the job. So yeah, I would hate to get so specific that you don't allow a realtor or some other business person to do their job. Is it possible that in cases like that, you could potentially add some sort of stipulation on time orientation, like in an open house? Maybe they need 6 signs, but they're only doing it for a brief window, a brief period of time. They're not putting out 6 or 12 signs and then they're left up indefinitely, or they're up every single day indefinitely. They're doing it for a very specific reason, for a specific amount of time, and then they get those signs down right away. I can tell you, realtors don't want to lose their signs. They put them up, they do their open house, they get them down. But it still allows them to do their job without creating a nuisance for the people that live in the neighborhood. So I don't know, is that one possibility of some sort of stipulation that would differentiate as to allowing a person to do their job without creating a constant nuisance?
Well, and discriminating against other businesses. You have a big job. I mean, we have a big task ahead of us because you start looking at separating businesses or things like that, and we end up in a real mess. But I think there must be a way that, and you've approached this. I'm very impressed with the writings, and yes, some of it could be interpreted differently. It's not all arbitrary and capricious. I think that there's reasonableness there, and some cases going to be tested. and just out of my own curiosity in reading this, there was a comment about one of the punitive parts of not obeying the law was going to jail and due process. And I want to first ask, has this city ever put anybody in jail with the sign code that you know of?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I don't believe so.
Okay. I wanted to get that out in the open before I ask the next question, which may be a little more reasonable, is, looking at due process, I noticed that there's some concern, and I have it too, and maybe it's how it's worded in the document that we received, that when we have an abandoned sign, for example, that we've somehow considered abandoned, the steps that we go through. First, I think there was flexibility in adding, let's say, the broker, adding the owner, but we also have people that have signs out there that the owner may not even know about because they're not. We talked about this before in another time, but the owner may not be. When I say absent owner, they may live in another state. They don't know there's a sign on their property. There's a lot of contingencies here that work, but in the due process portion of this, less than going to jail, is there an appeal process that people that have signs that in extenuating circumstances can come to the city and have some form of appeal or arbitration or something before having to go to court to sue?
The way, Mr. Chairman, the way it's written today and the way it's here in the code as well, the draft code, if a person was noticed, cited for a violation, any violation, they would have the opportunity to bring that violation into compliance. And they would also have, if they felt that they were wronged somehow, they would have the opportunity to fight that. Just saying, I think that the analogy that I've always used is, if I get a speeding ticket, well, I hope I don't get one now that I said that. So, I can either pay the fine, go to traffic school, or I can stand in front of the judge. So there's that due process thing. Now, we do not have an administrative appeal process for any of that. So if it would be cited, you either bring it into compliance or you basically fight it in court. And so the first step would be over at the city court.
So in the timelines which this would occur, I'm trying to think of that somebody has made comments that there's not enough time that somebody removes my sign, but you don't remove the sign in one day, and so you have 5 days to get it. After 5 days, it can be removed. Is that there's a process going through here of time that the person is notified of any violation? Or somebody has to submit. I think in previous language we had that once there's knowledge about let's say someone abandoned sign, that starts a process for getting information about the owner and notifying them and so on. But there is a time period that takes place through that notification process, is there not, before you actually remove the sign?
Mr. Chairman,
Chairman, members of the commission, when we do code, and this would be, I think, an item maybe we'd bring Chris Boyd, who handles kind of that portion of the shop in, but we do by practice give some time frames and so forth with our notices. It's never like a next day, but the only time it becomes a next day type option or those kinds of things, if there's a public safety concern that is associated with it that has imminent life safety issues with. Mm-hmm. So, on the sign side, there's typically a notice period. Usually there's first contact, then a notice period, then a second notice, and then possible court actions or those kinds of things that go on. So there's citation that then generates a court action.
Okay, so there is a process.
Yeah.
but not necessarily specific timelines.
Yeah, and we can come back with those to the commission. I'd hate to give you a specific.
Yeah, I'm not
timing.
asking for one. I think
Yeah.
just as a source of information that was highlighted that somebody was concerned about it. And I think if they're concerned, I think we should look at any due process procedural thing that would be less than going to court.
Mr. Chairman, there is a reason for the court provision, though, and that's if there are, if someone is a repeat offender and has not been willing to comply with the code after notice and the city working with them, that's why that provision has been left in, that there is the potential court process for those who just are unwilling to conform to the code.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting taking it out. I'm just suggesting that possibly for those lesser cases and not habituals, and that there is a process that somebody may or may not know about. But
Mr. Chair, I have a comment.
yes,
Is there any way that the development committee, I read through the entire sign code, and having come from a Midwest city who went through a similar process, and being new to this community, I'm not necessarily at odds with anything that I read. But as you went through your presentation, you're saying, well, we're going to need action from P&Z and council on this, on this, on this. Is there any way that you can go through your sign code and tell us where those pitfalls are that you feel that you need action on so that we can direct ourselves to that? As far as you sitting there laboriously going through something that you've developed for 2 years, we can read. I think one of the things that would help me and might expedite the process is tell us where the pitfalls are at. Where are those public comments from citizens and business owners that had issue with certain things that you as the city feel that may need to be rewritten or wordsmithed in this document? I really don't want to have to sit here and go through this document. I would really like to see an overlay that tells me where the pitfalls are at, that references raw comments from business owners and residents. Is that possible? Thank you.
yeah, just a comment. I know that one of the people that is concerned, there's a couple here today that have a lot of understanding and expertise in this field. And I know they have some concerns, and I think those concerns that are on the table, it would be nice if there, as Commissioner Bash suggested, that here are some areas of sensitivity, or here's some areas that might be interpreted different ways, because you have a lot of work here, and for the average guy like me looking through this, it looks very good. It looks very good. But I know that there are areas in any particular rules or interpretation rules or definition rules that can be interpreted differently. And if there are some sensitive areas or areas that we might be alerted to maybe look at how people could interpret this. I don't know if we're clear enough on.
Well, Mr. Chairman, commissioners, if I may, I that's really that is what we're hoping to accomplish, and the areas that are the most difficult, and that is the temporary sign stuff. Mm-hmm. Where is that line? Where is it? There's a lot of businesses out there who are very concerned that if they don't have some other way of having a sign other than the front of their business, that they're going to go out of business. Yeah. And so,
but we need to focus basically on that.
Yeah. So this is part of that. And then also, how we move through this, we're hoping to get feedback on electronic messaging and then on billboards and stuff, because those are some of the other, the other stuff as far as how much sign area on a front sign. I think it's relevant, but you can read that, as you said. Oh.
I think what you're asking us to do is come up and define reasonable. And that's very difficult. And in every case, you could ask us on any of these specific points where we have disagreements or varying, you think 3, they think 10. You're going to have 7 different opinions of what's reasonable. So I think what we could do is focus on those areas and at least, we need to go through like you're doing, and we need to listen to the electronic, because I have some concerns about that, the electronic messaging. But when we come back for a second meeting, let's hit the points where we have those areas of disagreement or where we're trying to define reasonableness. And then we can start going through and hear from each of us for an open house sign. Is 10 right? Is 3 right? Is 5 right? We're going to have to come up with something other than saying we want a reasonable number, because every one of us has a different thing. So I think to Dennis's, Commissioner Bass's point is, I think he's saying, let's focus on those areas where we're trying to come up with some guidance for you. And our numbers might not be right. The city council may have a different opinion as they go, it becomes before them, but at least we can give you some feedback as far as what we think is reasonable, or at least some consensus among us. And there'll be great discussions and great differences in what's reasonable between this group. So I think that would be a way to focus on it. And, I think we need to go through it, and as we're doing, and I think tonight we probably could listen to, if the people are here from the electronic messaging, we can listen to it. And then at our next thing, let's go back and start focusing on the areas where we need to come up and at least give you feedback as to what we consider reasonable. Make that make sense?
So I'm sorry, then you want to just have those discussions now, or chew on it for a couple of weeks?
At the next meeting.
If we could do that maybe at the next meeting, but I think if you could get us focused a little more, temporary signs is a big issue. Focus on temporary signs and how that might be, you might be able to find some consensus or partial consensus to help guide you. If there's another form of sign or other issues that relate to free speech or land use or commercial use or private land use, let us know what things that we can look in your draft and look at the comments of the business community and those representatives, so that we can focus on that. I think we'd be better, more able, I think, to help you.
And Chairman, members of the commission, so this is the first time that we've kind of, we also rolled this out to council as well. So this is the first kind of rollout of it to just to the public body. I definitely take what the commission is saying to heart. I think one of the things maybe out of this meeting, what we're going to get, and maybe that's going back to kind of the table of contents and looking at the areas that we've received some comment on, and then coming back to you. So temporary signs, I think, is one topic for maybe the next meeting, depending on the electronic messaging piece, when their availability to come in. So we have some experts here. That's another agenda item for a meeting. And that way we can kind of whittle away at that. And then the other thing that we'll be able, kind of coming away from this, I think we'll give you some examples of kind of, here's what the code would do as written. Here's what the WEMAR is saying they feel as they need. Here's what we feel meets kind of both intents. And that way we can give you some examples so you can kind of go yay, nay, that kind of thing. I think that would kind of help out the discussion.
Right.
Eric, is there, I know back in the Midwest, one of the things that we did, we went to surrounding communities that were going through the same thing to get examples of other communities' language on specific things. Is there any possibility, or have you done that as part of your process to see what exists in the West Valley, East Valley, and other communities regarding temporary signage, realtor signs, 3, 5, 7, 9, 12?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner. We have looked at some of the adjacent municipalities and so forth, and a lot of them are handling it in a very different way. So there's a lot of different ways of looking at it. One of the ways that one of the jurisdictions, a couple of them actually, if not more, they're approaching this with a sign permit. You go to the office, you get a permit to put the permit on the sign. You get one per business. We actually talked about that in the early stages of this, about some sort of a sign permit. The problems that we had with that were, one, the administration of that type of a permit regime in the back office. How do you keep track of all of that? And the other part of it is that gets really kind of close to that prior restraint thing, going to the government and asking for permission to say what I'm going to say on my temporary sign that wouldn't ordinarily require a permit. So, but to your point, there are different jurisdictions that are all kind of tackling this a different way. Some of them are taking a very let's wait and see approach. I think that's kind of dangerous myself, but others are just, they say, we really like our language, but we're just going to clean it up to get rid of the stuff that's going to violate Reed and leave the meat of the code together. Our code, we started out wanting to basically rewrite it anyway, and the Reed case just changed how we were going to rewrite it because we had to keep this content neutrality thing. But what it can do is put together maybe a matrix or something like that that says, here's 5 different jurisdictions, here's how they're approaching this idea.
I mean, I think it would be real helpful. I mean, we're talking about the real estate signs. How many does Peoria allow? How many does, Avondale or Litchfield Park or, and I think that would be helpful to be a starting point, at least, is if somebody says, well, they're allowing 10, then are we at a competitive disadvantage? What if you're a realtor that works in both communities? Do you know to put up 3 in Surprise and 10 in Peoria? I mean, that would be helpful. And I'm just using that one sign as an example of trying to determine reasonable.
Restraining trade.
Can we ask, is this time sensitive? I mean, do we have something that we need to accomplish within some period of time?
Chairman, members of the commission, I mean, our goal is to try to take it to council for, P&Z for recommendation to council for possible adoption August, September, but there's nothing holding us specifically to those dates. One of the things that kind of came out of the workshops, specifically, and Donna can kind of correct me if I misspeak at all, was that really what they're wanting to see before they start, getting in lawsuits and so forth, is that we're working towards an end goal of actually doing it. A lot of the recommendations that we had from some of those workshops were, get it under, if you're working towards trying to fix it, then you're not going to get yourself into too much trouble. So that's why, we've been working on this so long. So there's no specific dates we have to meet. There's no necessarily time frames. And if it requires, more meetings and so forth and more agenda items, then we'll get it done that way as well. I mean, we're not set on a specific date. We would like to have an end goal, but understanding, this is a very cumbersome issue. And we need to make sure that we're communicating and getting you the right information, as well as allowing you to give us an informed decision, instead of, well, here's the language, what do you think? That wasn't the meaning of kind of this meeting. It was more or less, here's the first blush at it. And now that we're having this interaction, we know now what we need to go back and do and bring back to you.
Mr. Chair. To make it short, and I would hope this is kind of what we're looking at, areas of focus and examples of those areas currently. And I think it's a little bit like, a bunch of fish or a little fish. Give us an area that we need to look at, because I don't think we have, having been a member of Weimar, I understand their situation pretty well. But an area that, because I sat down and looked at your materials, and that's great. But I didn't have a focus. I had a bunch of material. So if we can get those areas focused down to something that we can how do you eat an elephant? A bite at a time. Right. And we need to identify the bites as we go through.
Robert, I just have to commend you. Knowing you for years and knowing how long you've worked on this, what you have for us as a draft, incredible long-term process, great work. As you know, just from my questions that I had with staff and with you, the fact that you've built in public comment in so many of the areas that we receive public comment, really commendable. I really like it. I know there's just for me, since as a former HOA treasurer, I think about the perspective of my community's Rancho Gabriela. In Rancho Gabriela, we had signage rules. And so to me, I already know we have limitation of signage in Rancho Gabriela. Now, specifically for the public parts of the roads in certain areas, we obviously are in accordance with what the city has for its sign ordinance. But, I start to ask myself the questions. I know we have a sign ordinance related to all of the taped garage sale signs that end up on our city stop signs or school signs or whatever. I'm just curious, along the way, if you've incorporated the public comment really, really well. I know that there are just a few, I'll get to you later, areas that I just wondered if there were any other public comments for that weren't in the packet. And then, of course, the question on HOA community signage was a second area. So those were just some inclusions that I wanted to ask, between now and when we see you next time. If you could just take a brief look at that to see if there's any specifics, since we have so many HOAs in our city, how this would interface with HOA signage rulings that are in each HOA, as well as how that incorporates, since we have so many garage sales and such through our city, how that might impact too. So those are the few comments that I have. Thank you.
All right. Which supersedes?
Mr. Chairman, I can answer that one right now.
I knew that's where you were headed.
On private property, we don't have a lot of control. The way the First Amendment works is it's controlling the government's limitations on the actions of the private parties. But if private parties want to agree between themselves to limit their free speech rights, they can do that. So if an HOA has rules about how signage will be, and you choose to buy into that, you choose to sign on to those restrictions. And so those can be more strict than how the government and how the city is going to regulate your free speech.
And there's no recourse back to the
Do
city.
you have any other?
No, there's no
private.
recourse because that's a private agreement when you're talking about the HOA rules. The recourse is amongst yourself, whatever the amendment of the HOA rules. That's the recourse and process there.
Do you have any other comments for Mr. Kufis? Do you feel like you have enough information to then get ready for the next meeting to help provide us information, maybe?
Yes, I think, we can work on that. It probably will miss your packet because that there's a deadline that we have to get stuff into the system for that, but we can certainly work on this presentation. And,
And it could be sent other ways, email or something, just so that we'd all get the same information. But I think we've become more appreciative of this document that you've worked on the more we discuss it, because it's all encompassing, and you can see the complexity of trying to make this balance. So I appreciate that, and we'll look forward kind of to the next meeting.
right.
Any other questions?
We good for tonight?
We're almost.
And
Then we'll go on, and thank you very much, Mr. Kubis.
See you in 2 weeks.
Move on to our last item is any discussion pertaining to any future agenda items by the commission. Seeing none, then we'll adjourn the meeting.